Thank you. So I don't know what they were thinking to have two Australians on the same night. What do we know about entrepreneurship? What we know is that when you leave Australia and come to England, you do it for a damn good reason, because we don't leave our families and travel such a long way unless we think we're going to be successful. So Elizabeth is a great example of successful Australians here in the UK. And I think when you look at Australians that actually leave our great country, we only leave to be successful. So we have that in our genes, and so I just thought I'd start with that. As the introduction was, I'm now with IBM, who I'm sure you've all heard of, and having worked in startups for 12 years now, the question I got 2 months ago when I announced I was leaving 12 years of startups to go to IBM was, why? And I suppose talk tonight, we'll talk a little bit about that. So there's my @ name. I was lucky that I got my @ name years ago on Twitter, so please follow me. Sometimes I say things that are useful and interesting. But I want to talk about my digital journey. Who here remembers the Sinclair ZX80? A few people. Who actually had one? Well, I cut my teeth with technology on the Sinclair ZX80 way back in 1980. And I'm showing you this to sort of show my pedigree, that I've been playing with this stuff for a long time. And I think why I've been successful to date, I was 45 last month, is that I'm old enough to be able to be credible in the boardroom, and that's what IBM want me to be. But I'm young enough that I've been playing with this stuff for a long time and trying to break it. And so that's why I started on the Sinclair ZX80, played with bulletin boards back in 1983. And so when I talk sometimes, I say, hands up who's under 30, and a few hands go up, and I say, I've been online longer than you've been alive. Of course, I had to do that with a Commodore 64. Oops, where were we? Yeah, the Commodore 64. Remember almost the first blue screen of death whenever you saw that, booting up 64K RAM system, 38911 basic bytes free. That was a screen I looked at for many, many moons. That was my website from 1999. Actually, I've had one a bit longer. And there's a great website called The Wayback Machine, archive.org, that lets you type any website in and go back in time. And it went back as far as 99 for me. And if this was a live shot, you would actually see the scrolling GIFs along the bottom and the flashing things. It was the atypical 1999 really bad website. Looks a bit more like that these days, which I think is a bit friendlier. And that was my first blog. Also used the Wayback Machine to see what I was blogging about in 2004. And in fact, one of my first blog posts was about LinkedIn. And back then, apparently, I had 120 LinkedIn friends, which I think was pretty cool back then. But even back then, I was playing with these social networks. And what I'll talk about in a moment also is how you use social networks to get ahead. Because I'm looking at a group of very, very smart people, but as Elizabeth said, you're pretty much all the same. And when you go and approach customers or VCs for funding, they're going to say, what makes you different? And I guarantee you, whether it's in corporate life or startup life, before someone does business with you, they do their homework. So I make sure that I'm easy to find. If you Google me, I own the front page except for one listing, Andrew's Bar and Grill in Tennessee. I can never get rid of them. But every other one of those 9 on the front page are me, because I tried very hard to be visible. My LinkedIn page, I'll show you in a minute, shows what I've done and what I'm about, because I know that people will be stalking me to find out why I should be on their project. That's what my blog looks like now, a little bit more respectable. And in fact, Twitter allows you to go back in time to grab your old tweets. If you go to the settings page of Twitter, there's a button right at the bottom to say, grab my archive. And it's great. It actually sends you in about 20 minutes a zip file that allows you to search through all of your tweets. And this is some of my really amazing tweets from 2008. Relaxing at home on New Year's Day, that was an amazing tweet, award-winning. Updating my blog at Starbucks, which is something that, if Elizabeth follows me, I say a lot of at the moment. So that was pretty amazing back there. So I'd talk about my journey, my 12 years in startups. So I actually have worked in large companies. Back in Australia, I worked for Telstra and Optus, which is a bit like the Vodafone and BT, the two large telcos. So when people said, my goodness, you're moving to IBM, aren't you going to be hamstrung with process and everything else? Well, big companies have process, and I'm not afraid of that. But I've actually dealt with that back in big companies. But what I did in 2001, back then I was involved in the Rotary Club of Sydney. Now, as an aside, when I was 29 years of age, I joined the Rotary Club of Sydney. And none of my peers were doing that. And I thought, why are you joining an old person's club, Andrew? 2 reasons. Those of you that know Rotary, it's a worldwide charitable organisation. One of their aims is to eradicate polio, and they're nearly there. So I wanted, as a 29-year-old, to give back to the community. The byproduct was, where was I going to be able to meet 39, 49, 59, and 69-year-old people? So I actually learnt to really deal with these people as peers and friends. And so when I walk into a boardroom now and talk to CEOs and CMOs, I'm not frightened because they're my friends, people like that. So I learned at an early age to be very comfortable. And it was a sort of a quid pro quo because I would talk to them about all this digital stuff. And they would give me advice about problems I was having in my business. So I was in the Rotary Club of Sydney, and our president at the time, Bill Chillingworth, said to me, Andrew, he was the president of CB Richard Ellis, one of the big commercial real estate companies. He said, Andrew, we're doing this startup. We want to put together our company and 4 of our competitors. So CB Richard Ellis, Knight Frank, Jones Lang LaSalle, and Colliers Jardine. And we're going to put ourselves together and build a commercial property website. And we need someone like you to run it. What do you think? Sounds good. I moved from 5 or 6 years of telco into an industry I knew nothing about. And I knew I'd cracked it when 3 months into the job as CEO of Property Look, someone said to me, how long have you been a real estate agent for? You seem to know the lingo. 3 months? I said, wow, you picked it up pretty quickly. So I was really proving to myself that I could move outside of my comfort zone of a big, organised telco into essentially a company of one at Property Look. And we started it in 3 months. We launched. We became the largest in Australia. It was later sold to News Corporation. So Property Look was my first startup, and it scared me to death because that was when I did my first cold call. Picked up the telephone and said, hi, I'm from Property Look. I want to sell you something. I'd never been trained as a salesperson, but I had to learn very quickly that in order to get people to use the product and repay the shareholders, I actually had to learn to sell. So now I'm not afraid to sell, and I don't call myself a salesperson. I'm a facilitator. I'm a matchmaker. I bring people together. So that was 2001 to 2003. Then I moved into the mobile space, so 3 companies there. Legion One was actually an internal startup, part of a large company in Australia that did online messaging. They ran the television competitions for things like Australian Idol, those sort of big TV campaigns, and I was involved in the messaging company there. Then the reason I'm actually in the UK, Seeker Wireless is a location-based services company, and I was selling into Vodafone here in London so often. I was on a plane from Sydney to London every 3 weeks, it seemed. They said, why don't you move there? So 7 years ago, I moved my wife and my then 4-month-old daughter, Madeline, to London. And now she's 7, has a beautiful English accent. And last month, we applied to become UK citizens. So hopefully sometime next year, I'll actually have a dual passport. So that's why I'm in the UK. And Gigaphone was an interesting one. That was a Russian mobile advertising startup. And I can write a whole book on that, but we haven't got time for that. Armed guards and things like that in Moscow, that was all very interesting. And then I moved into social because I thought, back then this whole social wave is happening. I was playing with Twitter, playing with LinkedIn, and I could see the real opportunity of where social was going. And in fact, there were a lot of geeks, and I call Elizabeth Lovingly a geek as well, back in 2007, 2008, that met at this thing called the Tuttle Club. And what we were hoping and praying for is that one day brands would take social seriously. We kind of got our wish, and now brands take social so seriously, they're treating it the same way as traditional advertising, and that's a whole other lecture. So the company I work for was Visible Technologies, who are now owned by WPP, and they do social media monitoring. You've probably heard of companies like Brandwatch and Radian6 and Sysomos, same sort of company. And then more recently, I was with a company called Cred. I was the CEO of Cred, which is actually a competitor to Klout, and what they do is measure online influence. And this morning I was at Excel in London delivering a lecture on how to spot fakers on social media, because having been the CEO of Cred, I know a little bit about how people tell you they're influential on social when really they're not. So that's, again, another whole session. So Cred, not to be confused with Klout, and I can talk about that as well. But I really believe that social media is just like real life. And when we finish these lectures and the panel's ended, we'll all go out and have some coffee and some drinks. And try this. Go up to 2 people that know each other and are talking to each other, and try and inject yourself into that conversation. Now, you'll be invited into that conversation if you have something of value to say. If you go up to them and say, my startup is just wonderful, you should invest in me, they'll go, can you go away? That's called advertising. And no matter whether you're a startup or a corporate or a Coca-Cola or an IBM, if you just bowl up to someone and say, buy my product, they will tell you where to go. You have to be invited into that conversation. You have to have something of value to say. And so for me, sometimes it takes 7 minutes for people to actually allow me into the conversation. I must be really boring. Or they'll mention their latest trip to Brisbane, and I'll say, I'm actually from Australia, where did you go? And I've got a way in there. So when you're out there talking in real life, that's kind of how social media should be approached. It is a conversation. And what really pains me is brands are going, wow, we have another vehicle to just push out our marketing messages. And that, for me, is criminal. And so what I'm doing with IBM, with social business, as opposed to social media, is trying to get all of that social richness deep inside the organization both internally and externally. And I think social business you'll hear a lot more about in 2014. And I really believe, and this is one thing I get quoted on the most, that social media is the best piece of market research you never commissioned. This is relevant for a startup or a big corporation. There is so much being said there on social media. If only you were to listen to it, you would actually not have to spend a penny on market research. And especially if you're a startup in bootstrap mode, you cannot go and pay Nielsen or someone like that to do research for you, but it is all there. Yes, it is raw, it's rude, and it's real time, but it actually can tell you so much about what's happening in your industry, your competitors, or an area you're supposed to wanting to go into. If you're wanting to build the app that delivers beer to your desktop, are other people doing that? You can actually research that fairly quickly. So for me, social is a really cost-effective way to do market research at any stage in any organization. And one of the sort of poster children of digital and social is Burberry. And Angela Ahrendts has just been appointed as the retail head for Apple. She's still CEO of Burberry. But what she said recently was, consumer data will be the biggest differentiator in the next 2 or 3 years. Whoever unlocks the reams of data and uses it strategically will win. Now that's a very big retailer who has really got digital right, saying it's all out there. If only we know how to hoover it up and tame this big data, we can actually make sense of it. And whether you're a small startup or a big company like Burberry, it actually makes sense. Now, here's what Burberry did. They just recently released their quarter earnings. They were up 18%. Any boardroom would love to be able to say we're up 18%, but what she said was, reflecting changing consumer behaviour, footfall was soft online but grew strongly online. So they're seeing a shift as a physical retailer into the digital world. Now, Angela is a very smart woman because she said, I don't know everything there is to be known about digital, but my customers and my staff are all sort of 30-somethings. So why don't we ask them? So what she did was actually form an internal council of her 30-somethings and an executive council and actually help them create the vision. So for some of you that have been in this game for a while, why not actually get some reverse mentoring? Why not get some people that are younger or less experienced to try out your products? Universities are a great source of people that will do things for free. So some lessons learned. 12 years of startups. I'm going to mix this up a bit so I don't get sued because I'm going to say some things that are quite challenging. The first lesson I learnt was the founder can't be in too long, otherwise things get a bit hairy. So one of the startups I worked for, the founder, who was a really, really smart guy, was in for 8 years. But unfortunately, he was making mistakes for the first time, whereas I'd made these mistakes earlier in my career, and we were saying, this isn't going to work. Well, no, I think it'll work. And guess what? The company folded, along with some of my money that I invested in it. Someone a bit angry about that. But I've seen that happen time and time again. When the founder is in for too long and the company has matured to a stage, it can be a very hard discussion to say, you know what, it's time to move the founder off to be the president or the chairman or whatever, but you actually need sometimes to get some adult supervision in there. And what really pained me was seeing a company that I had helped grow, being the third employee, to actually fail because we didn't get the founder out early enough. Nothing wrong with him as a person, but he just didn't have the ability to execute later on in there. The other thing is, don't always think you've got to have everything gold-plated. One of the other startups I work with wanted to gold-plate everything all the time. No, Andrew, we can't release it just yet. It's not quite ready. It's got to have this next tweak to it. And as the sales guy out there in front of the customer, it's like, I need something to sell. In front of a big telco, and they just want to test what you've said that the product can do. So don't hold it back. Release it. And as Elizabeth said, be agile, fast, fail. Facebook release updates every single day. If you're in New Zealand, you get to see what Facebook looks like first because they do around the clock. And they actually, I've read a story about this, how they upload the code and they check it in, and every day there's a new release. So if a huge website used by 1 billion people can update in an agile way every day, it shouldn't hurt you either. The other thing is, as Elizabeth said, keep an eye on the bottom line. Get someone to do your bookkeeping. I hate bookkeeping. I love being out in front of customers, so don't give that job to me. So find someone, a partner, another company, another entrepreneur that's great with bookkeeping, and let them take care of that. So let's talk now about how we can use social to promote your company, because if you're in bootstrap mode, that you should be if you're at the early stages of an entrepreneur, you don't want to spend a dime on marketing or advertising. So you can use social. And in fact, the reason I'm here today is because of one tweet I sent back in January the 15th, 2011. And that's reverse engineer why I'm standing here tonight and that tweet. I was in San Francisco for the weekend. I'd come back from a sales trip with Visible Technologies in Seattle. I tweeted. What did I tweet? Arrived San Francisco. That's the actual tweet. I went back to my archive. And I just tweeted that, and I went out for a walk and to explore San Francisco, go on a cable car, that sort of thing. And another Australian, guy called Anthony McGregor-Day, tweeted back saying, "Oh, I didn't know you were here. We should all catch up." Now, Anthony then introduced me to my former founder of Cred. The rest, they say, is history. And because I had spent 2 years with Cred, IBM were interested in employing me. And because IBM have employed me, the Entrepreneur Wales people wanted me to come and speak. So that's why I'm here today, because of one tweet. I've got multiple examples of that. In fact, that same trip, I also tweeted the hotel I was staying at, saying it was my first time in San Francisco, and could you give me a room with a view, expecting nothing in return. The tweet I got back was, "We'll see what we can do." I arrived there on the Friday night. "Mr. Grill, thank you for your tweets. We're upgrading you to a suite. And you can have free internet for the weekend to tweet about your experience." So you never quite know. And often I'll tweet where I am. So I've tweeted tonight that I'm in Swansea talking to all of you. And you never know who was actually going to come up to you. And I didn't know this was going to be here until a few weeks ago, that you actually might connect with. So use Twitter strategically to let people know what you're doing and what you need help with, because someone out there in the 200 million people on Twitter can actually help you. So to get social, you've got to be social, and especially if you're in a social entrepreneur type company, if you're looking to build something around the social area. What I will do when I do my research, if someone came to me tonight and said, "Look, I want to talk to you about what I'm doing," I would take your card, I would then Google you with the word Twitter after it to see if you have a Twitter profile, because I want to get your backstory. I would go and look you up on LinkedIn, and I would see whether you actually have Twitter linked to LinkedIn. I would look at your backstory to see whether you're worth talking to. So I'll do my own research. Conversely, I would expect that some of you tonight will follow me on Twitter and look at my LinkedIn profile, and I'll know that you've done that. Because LinkedIn has a beautiful service called Who's Viewed My Profile. Who here knows about that? It is reverse stalking, and I love it. It's my daily pleasure to see who's been stalking me. For two reasons. One is I'm kind of, it's kind of cool. But secondly, if someone then rings me or contacts me a couple of days after having looked at my LinkedIn profile, I know they've done their research. And they're more likely to actually get a hearing from me because I know they've done their research. So what I can see there is who's actually viewed my profile. So if you want to contact me tomorrow and you haven't viewed my profile, I probably won't return your call. And what you can do there is also have your settings. So there are 3 levels of settings, and I've got mine fully open. So when I look at your profile, it'll show that it was me from IBM looking at your profile, or you could say it was just someone, or you could say I don't want you to know who I am. And I'm always very suspicious about who the someone on LinkedIn is. Why don't you want me to know that you've looked at me? So that's what I would look at. That's example of my profile. I've got my Twitter profile there. I've got my websites linked. I want to know more about you and your business. And make no mistake, people that you want to talk to, you want investment from, you want to meet and sell to, they will be doing your homework, and Google is your friend. So you can actually become very visible using social. And so what I've done with my LinkedIn profile, only a few months ago, I worked out you could add videos, and you could add slideshare, and you can add photographs. So I went back, and in fact, tonight I'm filming my presentation. I now have another asset that I can put on my website, and people can say, what was that talk you gave in Swansea? Well, go and have a look. So you can actually add videos there. I even went back to 2000 when I had much more hair, and I did a webcast for Telstra. I found this somewhere, and I added that. So if you're checking me out, you can go, well, this guy's got a decent body of work. He's done some interesting things, and he wants me to know about what he's done. You can do the same about your experience and your product and your company, and you will look that little bit different to the other person. And that's what it'll take. That's why you'll then be standing here in 2 years' time telling us all about your amazing investment story. Now, Google can be your friend. If you look at my Google profile, you can see up there Twitter, LinkedIn, Google+. So what's happening there is all these other websites are doing the work for me. As long as you're on these other profiles, Google does its work and actually looks at all the profile information and lists you there. And that's when you can hopefully beat out your Andrews Bar and Grill. Interesting, you'll see my photograph is there. Who here is on Google+? Okay, you'll all go and by the way, who's not on Twitter? Anyone here not on Twitter and prepared to admit it? Okay, 3 down the front. The 2 reasons you should join Twitter, and I generally have a 100% strike rate. I presented to 700 of my peers 2 Fridays ago within IBM. We did the same thing. I had about 40 emails after saying, yeah, you finally convinced me. The 2 reasons. One is brand protection. Unless your name is John or Jack Smith, you're likely to get something related to your @name, like Andrew Grill or E. Varley. Second, how can you possibly understand how this thing works unless you play with it? If none of you had ever used the telephone, it would be a bit hard to explain why you would have a telephone. So you can actually be a passive Twitter user. You don't have to be updating all the time. As I said before, Twitter is this amazing research tool. So why not sign up? Don't have to tweet. Follow me, follow Elizabeth. See how we use it. When I joined Twitter in 2007, I thought it was the biggest waste of time. But I joined it because I thought, well, why is it that people are actually using it? What can I learn from it? So the 5 or 6 of you that didn't have had your hands up, please join. But with Google+, what you can do is actually link your Google+ profile to your blog or your website. So if you search my name, my image is coming up because Google has said this really is Andrew's website because there's some code on my website saying this is my Google+ profile. And on my Google+ profile, it's saying this is my website. Google owns search. Doesn't matter who you talk to. So if you're on Google+, they're also helping optimize your search. You want to use all the tools you have in your kit bag to promote you and your company. And finally, the company I used to run, Kred, Kred.com, you can use this also as a social mirror on your brand or your own Twitter handle. It'll actually let you see what's the sort of content that people are sharing. What are you being known for? So here you can see that Kred thinks I'm important in marketing, automotive, CEO, and travel. Maybe I don't want to be important in those areas. The content I'm producing may not actually reflect that. So this can be a mirror. You can also look at your competition to see what people are sharing in terms of content about them as well. So you can use these free tools out there to find out very quickly, how you're going. The final bit of advice I would give you is there's this free website called About.me. Who's heard of About.me? Completely free. It basically allows you to do a one-page social profile. So if you're sitting here tonight saying, I don't want to do a blog, it's all too hard, a website, this is dead easy. It's free. It's template-driven. You just find a nice hero shot of you. There's a picture of me presenting up there. One paragraph on what you're doing. I've embedded a video there. And then down the bottom, you can link all of your social profiles. So some people like to link that page from their Twitter profile. So you can see, oh, who's this Andrew Grill guy? One-page summary of what you do. So if you're not ready to do a blog or a website, About.me can be very useful as well. So that's me. I'd love you to follow me, and I'd love to be part of the panel a bit later on. Thanks very much.